Chapter 5. The Great Deception.
Analyzing the evolution of the U.S. tax system reveals a set of reactionary decisions made by Congress over the course of our 230-year history that gave little thought to what structures would mathematically provide the most equitable system for taxing citizens. Political expediency and the limited accounting and collection mechanisms available at each interval ruled this decision-making. The actual mathematics and economics were secondary concerns. With the 16th Amendment, the Revenue Act of 1913, and the establishment of the Bureau of Internal Revenue, renamed the Internal Revenue Service in 1953, the government began to progressively tax individual incomes and corporate profits with declaratory tax filings by individuals and companies. This did make the tax base wider than the earlier limited structure of taxing mainly on imports, and did help the nation weather several economic challenges. However, it is still a very narrow tax base in the context of our dynamic and far-reaching socioeconomic world, and a very poorly devised system from the standpoint of effectiveness. Simple math tells us that the wider the tax base, the lower the tax rate, and the fairer the system. But since 1913, the tax theory and structures employed by Congress have mostly been the product of political pressures and lobbyists, not mathematics. PBS's Danielle Bainbridge got to the point with a touch of flair.
But war, what is it good for? Definitely taxes. And sing it again, y'all. Because during World War I, the federal government was in need of funds after declaring war on Germany. Starting in 1917, Congress passed a series of war revenue acts that did away with a lot of prior exemptions and raised the tax rates. And FDR's New Deal and the onset of World War II also saw the increase in federal income tax collection.
From 1913 into the 1950s, Congress, desperate for new sources of tax revenue, instituted personal income taxes and taxes on corporate profits, so that the burden would be shared equally between individuals and companies. However, in the time since the 1970s, Congress has dramatically moved away from this shared structure to a tax system where, as of 2019, the individual taxpayer now shoulders 86% of the tax burden for government revenue through income and payroll taxes. Conversely, in 2019, corporations contributed to only 6% of the burden. This means that today's salaried workers, who make primarily between $50,000 and $1 million annually, are paying for the vast majority of all government services. Imagine this in 2020. The top 50% of all taxpayers individuals earning $42,184 per year and above paid 97.7% of all income tax. That's 97.7% of the 86% of all tax revenue to the federal government being paid by individuals earning $42,000 and above. That means the bottom 50% of taxpayers, those earning less than $42,000, who make up half of all individual taxpayers, provide just 2.3% of tax revenues. When looked at collectively, including the companies that are only paying around 6% of tax revenue, it becomes clear that this burden on the middle class and upper middle class is strangling the American dream. This is not the most equitable structure to collect tax revenue, as corporations are clearly not paying their fair share, and in turn, the burden on individual salaries is simply too great. If we hearken back to the Founding Fathers, their instincts were well ahead of their time, as they had looked for a way to institute an equitable system of taxation, while struggling to meet the desires of the states and fairly collect the revenue between the citizens and corporations needed to run the federal government. Trying to strike the right balance between taxing companies and individuals is not easy, and Congress can be too quick to place the burden on individual salaries. We are reminded of Thomas Jefferson's warning in his first inaugural address, when he said,
"Still one thing more, fellow citizens. A wise and frugal government shall not take from the mouth of labor the bread it has earned. This is the sum of good government."
And yet, here we are. Take a look at the bold truth of the data increasing individual taxes and decreasing corporate taxes as a comparison. In 1943, 40% of tax revenue came from individual income taxes, and an equal 40% came from corporate profits. In our current paradigm, the proportionate burden on the individual has more than doubled since 1940, while in the same period of time, the tax burden paid by corporate profits has shrunk by almost 90%. This is debilitating to the current generations. To see this graph of increasing individual taxes and decreasing corporate taxes from 1940 to 2020, go to the disruptingtaxes.org website. Note that since 1940, government revenue from excise and estate taxes has amounted to just a few percent, an amount of no impact in the big picture. Now let's ask why Congress ushered along this dramatic shift of relying so heavily on taxing salaries and reveal its consequences, both intended and unintended. In part, Congress has been moved over the years by the notions of optimal tax theory, which proffers a framework for a progressive tax system on income. Under this premise, the rich should pay more taxes so that the government can share their wealth and help provide for the poor. However, providing equal treatment and opportunity for all is foundational to the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, a promise rooted federally in the Fifth Amendment and made binding on the states in the 14th Amendment. And just maybe, these equal protections should be extended and applied to today's progressive tax system under the tax code, which we will discuss in more depth in coming chapters. For now, suffice it to say there is a fair argument to be made that unequal taxation based on income levels is not only very ineffective in its current form, but also possibly runs counter to the very notion of individual liberties. This is not to say that the wealthy should not pay their fair share, or that the nation should abandon its efforts to support and lift people from more disadvantaged situations. The Constitution, under the general welfare provisions, clearly provides that the government protect the poor and the underprivileged. This goal is noble and vital for a thriving developed country. The question is quite simply one of strategy. Instead of supporting people through obscure provisions in a 70,000-page tax code, perhaps we should directly support people with actual resources, strong schools and public services, affordable housing and health care, food benefits, and so on. As CNBC's Mackenzie Sigalos reports,
instead of handing out direct checks to people who need help, Congress runs a large number of social policies and benefits through the tax code itself. That means that, theoretically, you can substantially reduce the amount of tax you have to pay by claiming certain deductions, credits, and expenses on your tax return.
However, many people lack the knowledge or resources to take advantage of these complex provisions that are buried within the 70,000-plus pages of the tax code. If we were able to dramatically increase the tax base while dramatically simplifying the tax code at the same time, there could be more equal treatment for citizens across the board and significantly more resources to fund the social safety net. Congress could and should return to voting on those protections on the spending side of the political debate, rather than manipulating the tax code for the avarice of special interests on the revenue side. The reality is that the vast majority of exemptions and loopholes in today's tax structure put legal tax avoidance strategies into the hands of the wealthy. To illustrate this, consider the incredible disparity between the growth of billionaire wealth and the growth of average citizen wealth in the U.S. between 1990 and 2020. When billionaire wealth soared 1,130%, median income families saw their wealth increase by a meager 5.37%. Think about that for a moment. Why would one part of the economy have such enormous growth in wealth, and another part of the same economy, over the same amount of time, have so little growth? There is a systemic, mathematical imbalance in the tax code. The tax system has minor or non-existent taxes on transactions for the buying and selling of assets, allowing that growth to expand by 1,000%, while at the same time significantly taxing the transactions of salary payments. This hurts middle-class families the most because heavy salary taxes limit the cash available for down payments on homes and assets, and by limiting their purchase of assets, restrict their ability to create wealth and leave the middle class with an expansion level of just 5%. In an interview for a CNBC special report, Lawrence Mischel, distinguished fellow at the Economic Policy Institute, illustrated this point quite effectively.
Middle-class workers over the last 40 years have not been able to adequately benefit from the productivity growth, the expansion of the pie in the economy. We've measured this and found that the typical worker has fallen 43 percentage points behind the growth of productivity. What that means is that the middle-class worker could have earned 1 percentage point more per year in compensation growth over the last 40 years. And they didn't get it because there was an erosion of labor's share of overall income, and because of rising inequalities such that the top 10%, particularly the top 1%, and even more so the top 0.1%, took in much of the gains from the growth of the economy.
This reality can be seen in the data from the Institute for Policy Studies, which describes how, between 1980 and 2018, the tax obligations of America's billionaires, measured as a percentage of their wealth, decreased 79%. So not only is a progressive tax system extremely limited in creating a broad enough tax base, but the tax system is inherently ineffective and provides opportunity for legal manipulation. Wealth and abundance are important goals for a society, but tax structures that do not treat all in the economy fairly stifle the American dream, inequitably restrict wealth creation, and shackle the development of a true meritocracy. Under deep analysis, the currently imagined goals of burden sharing in a progressive tax system are revealed to be a false premise. As Hamilton asserted and predicted in Federalist Papers number 12,
tax laws have in vain been multiplied. New methods to enforce the collection have in vain been tried. The public expectation has been uniformly disappointed, and the treasuries of the states have remained empty.
it is an elaborate deception. And there is a better way.